Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Wanda Kay or Dr. S, and we are going to talk about what is so important about reading and writing. Um, Many of you are taking my creative writing course, and I think it's really important to start out the course discussing the importance of reading and writing instead of just jumping right into write whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want, and to kind of understand what makes writing really powerful. So to do that, let's start with my first slide that talks about my 8 books that changed the world. Now, this is not in any way me telling you that these are the books that you need to go out and read. They are the most important 8 books, far from it. My intention with this course and my intention with this particular opening is that these are 8 books that are really important to how the world evolved, but that does not mean that there are not others that you might find more important. Um, it is setting up a construct, though, of understanding what I believe is very important when you think about what literature should do if you want it to be meaningful and lasting. Um, the number one thing that I think that makes books really important in terms of world changing abilities is that great authors trust that their readers are smart, curious humans. The worst thing that a writer can do is assume that their person who is reading the book with them is not somebody that the writer themselves respects. So respecting your reader is very important. Um, and I want you to consider how you can start to respect your reader. Um, Unlike looking at a work of art or film, and I use a lot of film references in this because I do believe that more people are open to watching films than reading. And this is not a literature um, type of idea or type of course that I want you to necessarily engage with, but literature does, understanding, knowing what literature has done and continues to do, understanding that does make you a more effective writer. Um, so when you look at literature as opposed to film or as opposed to visual art, literature needs the reader to write that book with the author. Without the reader, that book is nothing. It's just symbols on a page that don't mean anything. And with the reader, the book becomes a meaningful, living, breathing thing. And the author needs the writer, and the writer, or I'm sorry, the author needs the reader, and the reader needs the author. You cannot read and multitask. So that's something that makes reading very challenging for most people today. I would suggest many humans can't do this anymore. Many humans can't sit down and read anymore because most of us are so used to multitasking, whether that is our cell phone and the TV and having a conversation and trying to do something else. That multitasking has just really taken over our lifestyle. With reading, you have to use your brain and your heart, and it is nearly impossible to do 2 things at once when it's reading is one of those things. So I want to encourage you today as a writer to begin your writing journey with reading. And that's why I wanted to start out with the idea that there are 8 books that really changed the world. And I'm going to start with a really controversial choice. I believe that the number one book that changed the world is the Bible. And there is a lot of people that are going to push back on this. And that's okay. Like I said, these are 8 books that I think changed the world. And I encourage you to find your own 8 books. And hopefully that this is going to encourage you to go forth and read and find your own 8 books that are different. And you have a great reason for your 8 books to be different than mine. Um, but hear me out in terms of why the Bible is something that I think every writer should read, at least partially. First of all, It's written by many people, as are several of the other books that I'm going to say should be read by writers themselves. So looking at the text of the Bible as we know it today is understanding how a work of what many readers will perceive as fiction and many readers will perceive as a spiritual truth, historical, and the Judaic people definitely see as, at very minimum, some of the historical elements that happened within their people's history, including just seeing family trees that are completely opened up in that Bible, but that it is an anthology and it's a digest of historical beliefs. It's a digest of spiritual beliefs. And it is really important to understand that it was one of the first and most powerful character creating texts that have ever been written. In fact, particularly the first books of the Bible, the Torah, that we share among the three of the world's largest religion, is how is God given a character? How is God seen as a person? Given a very human, divine persona, and the psychology of what it means to be humans and why humans do the crazy things that we do. And it blurs that line between the natural and the supernatural. And I think all great literature does that. It's just that the Bible was one of the very first books that did that. And I also want to remind you that I believe that great literature is literature that exists longer than the last 10 or 15 or 20 years. Great literature is something that has lasted for at least a couple hundred years. And you're going to really see that when you look at my list. So something that is maybe, I don't know, 50 years old. For example, if you were to look at any of The Lord of the Rings, for example, or To Kill a Mockingbird, those are really great texts, but we have to kind of see if it lasts and persists throughout time. And the Bible certainly is one of those that texts that, love it or hate it, it has persisted throughout time. I also see it as literature that has really formed the basis of three of the world's largest religions. Islam, it's 23% of the world today. It uses the first 5 books in the Quran. That's 1.6 billion people that are familiar with those texts. Christianity, 32%, or 2.2 billion. Or if you wanted to look at it from the Jewish perspective, which the Old Testament really, I believe the Jews would say belongs to them. It is the oldest of those 3 religions, is 14 million. Not as much of the world population, only 0.2% of the world population, but still a main religion in the world today. And again, it is the seed for the 2 largest religions in the world today, Islam and Christianity. So 23% and 32% comes to a pretty whopping 55% of the world's population. Now, I don't want to leave out the Hindus or the Buddhists. We've got 15% and 7% of the world. They just don't have a singular authoritative text. Their religions were not formed in the same manner. They have important texts, but it's not that single authoritative text that the other 3 world religions really do form around that piece. I also think that it is important to look at the Bible because it is kind of the beginning of where literature criticism began, and it is an understanding of the fight between how do we read text. Now, if you were a biblical scholar, you would have known the term exegesis, and that is simply a Latin term that means it draws out what the author means. So how am I, as a person living in 2023 America today, supposed to understand what somebody wrote about over 2,000 years ago? How do I draw out what that person wrote 2,000 years ago? That is complicated. That's also different than eisegesis, which is to read in what the reader wants to read in to that text. And so which one of those ways should we go about? I tend to believe that the best way and how I would want my readers of my work to uh, respond to the things that I write is to try to understand what I meant and to come together in a conversation such as that. As a writer, I'm not completely opposed to allowing the reader to just read into what I say, what I've written down, what they want, but I would prefer them to first, I'd prefer my reader to first draw out what I meant and then take that on and write their own things with a reference to me and say, this is what Dr. Wanda said, and this is what I am taking away from that, even though that may not be what Dr. Wanda meant originally. So I do think that's important as a writer. So that's something that you as writers are going to have to consider too. When you write something down, do you want your reader to come into that creative union together to draw out further what the author meant? Or do you want that reader to come to your writing and to just take what they want to take from it and ignore what you meant? And I think that most writers want at least to have some voice, um, and maybe are okay with that reader taking some of what they want, but understanding what the writer meant initially first. At any rate, there's actually a science behind exegesis. It is a four-part science. It talks about the literal, so how biblical scholars originally, again, that was the basis of literature criticism, so how the literary lenses of feminism and Marxism and postmodernism, all of that is studied today and performed today in a lot of our literary classes, is based on this idea of let's break down in that text first the literal, what is literally being said. Second of all, the allegorical, what is the metaphor or symbol or foreshadowing of this text? Third, the moral or the ethics behind the text. And fourth, the mystical or the spiritual meaning of it. So you could generally take this four-step method of understanding what a writer is saying to any text at all. You could bring it to Aesop's fable, for example, the tortoise and the hare. Who wins that race? Well, there's the literal story of that tortoise is slow but steady, and the turtle walks down the race course, and the rabbit is kind of spastic and would run ahead and run back and laugh and etc. But in the end, the turtle literally wins the race. The allegory is that secondary meaning of the symbol is if you are slow and persistent, that's better than being fast but inconsistent. The moral is to run your own race, and the anagogical meaning or the spiritual meaning is that know yourself. So that's how you could take that kind of idea of those four elements that was the beginning of literary criticism, and certainly not the only way to do literary criticism, and really can attribute that to biblical scholars. And the Bible's text was an early text that was rich enough to do all of those things. So that's why my first controversial choice is the Bible. Now I wanted to talk about the other seven, and the other seven are really simple in terms of talking about some things that most of you have been exposed to some extent. And I didn't want to keep it just to the Western canon. So certainly Homer's Odyssey, Dante's Divine Comedy, and Shakespeare's works are very much Western culture. And the reason why I think that they're important is because Homer's Odyssey is really about how a hero develops and becomes more of a wise hero as opposed to just somebody who won in a battle, and how that hero returns to the homeland that they left. How does somebody who was very successful, left their home, come back? And that's something that I think many people struggle with today, is how do you come home again? Dante's Divine Comedy, I really think, is one of the earliest works in that finding a tension between a natural world and a supernatural world. If you, as a writer, can understand how to meld those two, and Dante's very complex, he's very hard to read. You need to read a ton of the side notes if you don't have a lot of that understanding of that time, because it was making a lot of political commentary on the leaders of the world at that time. It's understanding what does evil look like, what does good look like, what does humans look like, how do humans find themselves in that kind of spectrum that's out there, and how do we find the good. So it's very complex understanding of who we are as humans and how we interact with the supernatural world and the world of ethics and morality, that is sometimes not as clear. The third piece is Shakespeare's works. I know that Shakespeare's been canceled a bit as of early times here, but Shakespeare does create a lot of accessibility that just wasn't there prior to Shakespeare's writing. So Divine Comedy, for example, not the masses were not reading Dante's Divine Comedy. Um, but Shakespeare's work was literally meant almost as a capitalistic force to drive people to the theaters, make people want that product, make people want to see that entertainment, to make money, to keep that theater open. And so I really appreciate creating accessibility to the masses and have multiple tiers of understanding um, the story. Again, if you go back to that idea of exegesis, the literal story is entertaining. There's a very rich allegorical part to that as well, very rich anagogical, and of course the morals and ethics, also rich. So being able to fill all four of those elements in a way that also is very accessible is tough to do. And Shakespeare does that in a way that the Bible was able to do it as well. So really just extraordinary writing, regardless of whether you agree or disagree with kind of the culture that it came out of. The writing is powerful. The Quran actually is another one of the pieces that I think changed the world. It was also written by many people, just like the Bible was. And I would suggest all of Homer's work was as well. And I wanted to put Socrates in here, but there just wasn't room because I didn't want to continue on and on. So written by multiple people. So again, we're getting more of this anthology, this larger view, but again, emphasizing the oneness of Allah, and the importance of faith in providing guidance on moral values as well. But it's in a way that, again, is responding to the masses. If any of you have studied or read and been exposed to the Vedas, very important readings, very, very old, much older than the Bible, much older than the Quran. It's poems. So again, literature that speaks to the Hindu teachings about the divine. So again, this meeting of the natural and the supernatural world from a much more ancient perspective than the Bible. And then written again by a group of people, Confucius, the Analects. It's understanding throughout the writings the concept of Ren, or benevolence, really important concept that was gotten at. And the Chinese works are a little bit different. Again, remember, not everybody approached literature in the same way that the Western world does. So just like, when we look at some of the main world religions that we just discussed, that need for a singular text is much greater in the Western world than it was in the Eastern world, from my understanding. And then finally, the youngest piece on here is Things Fall Apart, and it's analyzing the effects of colonialism in traditional African society. And I like that book to be included, even though it is incredibly young. It is an infant. I believe it was written in the 50s, compared to some of these other texts that are on here, is because I did want to include a modern piece, but I wanted to show how modern pieces could still really show things that were those four levels of exegesis. So the literal, the moral, the spiritual, etc. And I think Things Fall Apart did that. So those 7 plus the Bible, so a total of 8 texts, are really what I believe make a difference in terms of understanding as a writer. Not trying to say you should read those texts yourselves to, create a moral compass or anything like that. It is saying those pieces of literature are really powerful examples of writing. How awesome are those writing techniques that were used? So, what makes literature great? Well, literature transports you to other worlds with you as an active participant, and it allows you to walk in the shoes of other people in a way that nothing else does. And again, because you are coming to that work with the writer, together you are filling those shoes of the characters that are put on the page. So, when people say, well, you can't possibly understand, I believe that great writers and great readers, and it's not easy to be a great reader, it's not even easy to be a reader these days, really can begin to truly understand the experience of other people. And that helps us understand what it means to be human throughout time, throughout space, throughout all of these smaller identifying factors that are, I think, in many ways divisive. So it creates this sense, in the best way, of developing empathy for all people and for the human spirit, even if it's an evil character, understanding where that character might have come from, how that character might have been created in that way. And it develops this universal community. So outside of time and place, you can commune or discuss with people who come from very different backgrounds at very different times with very different experiences than you do. That's a really powerful element. Literature is the how and the what. So literature marries form and content in such a way that it is just as important as how you say something as what you say. And especially as you get to know people in relationships, whether that be family relationship, friendship relationships, professional relationships, delivering a message, the message sometimes has to be said, and you can't completely control what is being said, but you can definitely control how you say it and being very thoughtful in how you say that message. Um, Literature is a craft, and it is allowing this craft of the how and the coldness of the idea to come to the listener or to the reader in a powerful way. So it's a skill, and it's a skill that you're going to learn best by watching how others have done it. Literature also allows you to become besties, so to speak, with humanity. You start to understand the complexities of what it means to be human, and it is a great way to manage this current dichotomous thinking that there is right and there is wrong, there is good and there is evil. I think that's very problematic, and writers cannot afford to have this very dichotomous world. You can create characters that are dichotomous, but understanding that there is a universal human experience, that people are great. We have a lot of complexities to ourselves. There can be people who you dislike strongly, you think are terrible people, but still can do good in the world, still can have good pieces to themselves. You can still have empathy from where they came from and why they became the people that they did. I don't think that that is a dynamic that is very encouraged these days. And I think it's really important that writers writers are kind of like that last blockade for civilization, and understanding how we can better inform and share and converse with our writer to understanding things as complex as they can be. It allows that reader to unwrap the world with best minds of all time and place and space as our companion. There are some amazing minds from 2,000 years ago, from 5,000 years ago, and allowing that to have our time machine and commune with them. What a wonderful experience. And it allows us to ask and answer great questions. A lot of people think that there's a lot of questions that they just can't answer. And come and look at the greatest minds throughout time, the writers, and how did they ask those questions, and continue down the path of what other questions those gave birth to, and how did they answer those. It may not be the question that you were going to ask that gives you a great deal of illumination. And it also might not be the answer that you want, but hearing an answer that you've not heard before might help you get to an answer that you need. My point, reading can change your life if you let it. And as writers, we are able to change our reader's life. What a powerful gift. So I hope that you enjoy the next series of videos and think about what you can do to yourself, not only read and change your life, but write to help change others.